We are on. We are on the Speak Your Truth podcast with Mark Ross. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. Uh, I want to welcome to the show Miss Lisa Tickel.
Mhm.
Did I get that right?
You got that right.
All right. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having
Before we
me.
get, thank you so much. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, Lisa, and where you from?
So I am from San Diego. I still live in San Diego. We were just kind of talking
Oh,
about that, weren't we?
yeah,
And I'm born and raised here, so
yeah.
lifelong resident. And I am also a podcaster. And so my podcast deals with childhood abuse healing for people. And so the name of it is Healing and Growing Hand in Hand. And I share a lot of my stories about my history. And so yeah, in a nutshell, that's who I am. I also, let me say one more thing. I
Sure.
also am starting, I just rebuilt this workshop that I'm having for women, and it's called Women's Childhood Abuse Healing Workshop. And I'm going to kick it off after the first of the year. And it's really powerful. And women who want to really begin their healing journey, it's a great opportunity.
Nice, nice. Now, I know you have a backstory about yourself and your journey, but
Yes.
before we go into that, talk
Mhm.
to me about your podcast, Healing and Growing Hand in Hand.
Yeah. So the number one reason why I created the podcast is to help shorten people's suffering.
Mm,
Because my childhood abuse, and I know we'll get into it, as far back as I can remember. And I began my healing journey at 19. I'm now in 61. And so it's been a long journey. But for so many years, so many of those years, there was not any, we didn't know a lot about trauma like we know now. So the therapy that was out there wasn't for really specifically for trauma people. And there wasn't a lot out there. There wasn't the podcast. There wasn't the books. There
mm,
wasn't the
hmm
knowledge. And
hmm
so, I just thought, if I can create something that I can put out there that will help people, even if it gives them that aha moment to where they'll begin their healing journey, that'll be awesome. And so
hmm
I built it for a very specific purpose. And there's four pillars that I have for the podcast. The first one is allow people to come on and have a voice and share their story and their story of healing, most importantly. The second pillar is to have bring on experts who give us resources and tools and tips on how to navigate this whole trauma journey.
Sure.
And then the third is to bring awareness to areas of abuse that people aren't aware of. For instance, I had a guest on that talked about children that are abused in sports, and it's still going on
Mm.
and it's still prevalent.
In
And then
sports.
in sports, in children's sports, and he gave the statistics. Just here in the United States, there's 20 million children that play sports a year,
Mm.
and over a third of them are abused still. So that is a huge problem. And this guy on my podcast was amazing. His name's Bobby Click, and he is so passionate about this, and he's really trying to get more awareness back out there again about it.
Mm.
That's a big tricky problem right there. That
Mm.
one, that's a big one. And then the fourth pillar is prevention. And so bringing on experts that can help parents who are, like, for instance, I had a gentleman on who had a child that they had adopted from Russia. And the child ended up having a lot of trauma, and there was a lot of stuff, and they weren't prepared for it. So, you don't know what you're getting into sometimes. So he brings in a lot of tips in helping people with children with trauma. So that's in a nutshell, again, my podcast.
Nice, nice. What led you down that road to doing your podcast? Which would lead me to ask about you and your
Right.
podcast.
Right. Because you know what? Like I said, I suffered for so many years. I suffered. I was in survival mode for so many years and didn't have the help out there.
Mm,
And so, on
mm,
my podcast, I set it up to where we're having a conversation and the audience gets to listen in. And hopefully the audience is walking away with a lot of golden nuggets that, again, are going to help them either begin to have their healing journey or maybe go deeper. Because with survivors, so many times our voice is shut down. And there's a lot of shame, and the shame continues to shut us down. And a lot of times, a lot of our behaviors from our trauma make
mm,
us think we're crazy. And there's a lot
mm,
of stuff that goes on in our head and we don't talk about it. So if they hear someone talking about it on the podcast, they'll realize, oh, it's not just me. this is a symptom of trauma. Okay, maybe there's something to this. So that's the, that's why that's why I created the podcast.
Nice, nice. And you mentioned some survival mode, and I think a lot of us are still in survival mode, Lisa, because of the trauma that we've experienced growing up. I mean,
Yeah.
and so many of us, we often say, man, my mom, she whooped me
Yeah.
every day for something. It could be any
Yeah.
damn reason. My mom spanked me, and now, I spank. You know, I I I I
You do
act
what
out.
you know. You do what you know. That's what you were
Yes.
raised with. Mhm.
Yes, yes, that part. And it's so prevalent within us to, I don't like to use the word regurgitate, but it's like you throw back what you know
Right.
because
Right.
it was your normal.
Correct. Exactly.
It,
Exactly. Hmm.
yeah, it,
It
it
was your
was your
normal.
normal. And despite how crazy it may have been, it was still your normal. So for you, that could be like an everyday thing to be emotionally neglected or, you know, whatever. I mean, abused in whatever way, but
Right.
the trauma is still there, and you've absorbed so much of it that it's like this is regular everyday stuff.
Right. And there's people, and I ran into this, it's not uncommon. And I actually experienced this in my life where you don't even realize that you were being abused. And that sounds crazy,
Very.
but it's not that uncommon because part of it is what you were saying. That's their normal. They were raised in a home where they got smacked around every time they turn around, and that was their normal. It wasn't until they later on go out in life and they see, oh, that wasn't normal.
Hmm.
And I kind of experienced that in my life. I had, worked through a lot of forgiveness with my brother who had abused me, but didn't even realize at the time the abuse that was coming from my parents. It took
So
me
you
several years to figure that out.
so you were abused by your mother, your father, and your brother.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, here's a off the cuff question. Was the abuse different between each person, or was it the same?
It was kind of actually it was different. So with my brother, I had all the abuses except for sexual. Fortunately, I wasn't sexually abused. So with my brother, it was verbal, physical, emotional. I mean, he tortured me. And he was 7 years older than me and he was big.
Hmm.
With my mom, it really began to change, and I can share this in my story, but around the time of 11 or 12 when I started to actually put weight on because I was emotionally eating because I didn't know that's what I was doing.
Hmm.
And she was very verbal. She was very emotional. There was abandonment stuff, and then I lost her when I was 16. She passed away.
Okay.
With my dad, um, he had so much fear in him that he didn't
Mhm.
protect me. He never ever protected me.
Really?
Literally, there was one time he literally physically ran away. When my brother was going off on my mom one time, I remember
Uh-huh.
we were trying to find my dad. We didn't know where he went. He disappeared. I found him in his bedroom, in their bedroom, sitting on the bed, and he was like shaking. So he was clearly being triggered, but your your son who's bigger than you is, going after your wife and you're not doing anything about it. He never protected us.
Wow. So sorry to hear that. Uh, your dad basically he mentally checked out.
Yeah. Yeah. He totally, yeah. And I know, and I knew with him that he grew up with abuse. I knew he left home at 14 because his father was so abusive with him. So he
Okay.
lived on the streets. I mean, I could imagine the trauma that my father went through leaving home at 14. And this is in the early, see, he was probably in the early, like the 1930s or 40s. So, there wasn't a lot
Yeah.
of protection for children.
Yeah.
And then I discovered with my mother, and this is only like within the last 5 years, her history, because I had to do it through ancestry. I had to research her,
Okay.
and found that she too was probably abused a lot. My grandmother married a lot of men, so she was around a lot of men, and
Mm.
so there was. So I know they both came from abuse. And I know
Mm,
that trauma can be generational. Absolutely. And it can get in our
absolutely.
DNA and it can be passed down to our children. And,
Absolutely.
but it can also be
Absolutely.
broken. That's the
Yeah.
most important thing. It can be
Amen.
broken, and you can live a very full life even though you didn't start out real well.
Mm,
Your life didn't. It can certainly get better.
sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. Sure. You hit a couple of nails on the head, Lisa, when you mentioned how abuse can be passed down like a generational thing, or
Yeah.
maybe even a genetic thing.
Correct. Yes.
And because I think a lot of us, we do have those genetic markers for violence,
Yeah.
uh, or to drink, right?
Right.
You know,
Right.
if your mom was a heavy drinker or your dad was a heavy drinker, then
You're
chances are
susceptible.
you might be a heavy. You know what I
Correct.
mean? Given the right circumstances,
Yes.
that could be you too.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And there's been studies done like with some of the Holocaust victims, and I'm probably going to not say this correctly because it's been a while since I've heard about it, but I know that they have proven that some of the trauma that happened to them did pass down to family members, like
Mm,
genetically.
mm-hmm,
So they have
mm-hmm.
also shown that trauma or childhood abuse does change your brain. It can change your DNA. Yes. Yes.
Yes, it
This is
can.
all this is stuff that I'm telling you that they're finding this stuff out, and it's absolutely fascinating. Um, it would be awful if there wasn't a way to heal from this, but
Mm-hmm.
it's encouraging to know that there's so many modalities and, and ways that you can work through your healing and have a good life and not have, beauty from ashes, right? So you
Right.
started out rough, but it can, like I said, it can end really well.
Indeed. And to further your point, I I, I I wrote this this statistic. It goes along to your point. It says that childhood emotional abuse and neglect can result in permanent changes to the brain,
Yep.
causing psychological and emotional problems as adults.
Correct.
So, with that being said, how can that cycle be broken, Lisa?
Well, in my life, I knew as a teenager that I was abused. I understood that, even though there were no laws protecting children and there was all that, I knew that I was abused. And, I even considered not having children. I was concerned because I also knew that for some reason I knew that abuse could be passed down. Um, you know, the first thing I always say to people when you realize that you've been or you or suspect that you've been have been abused, the number one thing you really need is self-awareness, because the
Mm,
self-awareness is going to help you figure everything out. Because as we were saying earlier, trauma is also stored in your body and it's also stored in your subconscious.
say that one more time.
So your trauma and your abuse
Uh-huh.
is stored in your body
In
as
your
well as your subconscious.
mm,
So
mm.
a perfect example of what this looks like is when someone gets triggered. And when they are triggered, it is they're reliving, they are completely reliving that moment. They may not understand at the time that that's what's going on, but their
Mhm.
body and their brain is reacting to that moment as though it happened, that moment that happened however many years ago.
Yes.
So the thing is with self-awareness, you can start paying attention to your body and you can start paying attention to what's going on. And you can start working in, and I always say you must have a trauma therapist, not a regular talk therapist, because
Mhm.
again, you need someone that's going to help you get it out of your subconscious as well as out
Mm,
of your body. So the two things I say for sure is, having the self-awareness and paying attention to your body, paying attention to your thoughts, think about this stuff, but also get in with a trauma therapist. You don't have to go to a trauma therapist forever. It's not a lifelong thing at all. As a matter of fact, so many of these modalities, I was just listening to one of my books, and I did EMDR too. And EMDR, sometimes it can take a while, but there's people that in 8 sessions, they're good. They don't have these awful triggers anymore. So that's what I say about, how you really go about beginning your healing journey.
Okay. I understand everything that you said. Um, with you, the abuse that you went through with your mother in particular, how
Yeah.
did it affect you
Mm.
as an adult?
It affected me a lot. As a matter of fact, I'm still working through some forgiveness with her. Seriously, because
Yes. Yeah.
one of the things, so I'll give you an example. One of the things, like I said, I started putting weight on around 11 or 12, and I was emotionally eating. Had
Emotional eating.
no idea. I mean, I remember when I think back to it, I remember eating, but I had no idea it correlated to putting weight on, right? I just, nobody was educating me. Nobody was telling me that. But my mom got very critical and started uh, badgering me about my weight, but she wasn't telling me how to lose weight. So I was confused. I didn't know. And so she got to a point where she wasn't going to buy me any more clothes until I lost weight.
Oh,
Yeah, she decided that you're going to lose weight and then I'll take and buy you clothes for school. And I didn't know how to lose weight. And I was an active kid too. It's not like I just sat around. I was very active, but I ate a
yeah.
lot. And so she refused. And so my dad had to end up going and buy me clothes. So I ended up, with that binge eating and or emotional eating, it became such a habit in my life. And I spent a lifelong with my weight going up and down, up and down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, as I've worked through my healing, I finally have that managed a lot better. But it's something that I always have to be aware of. The thing she used to say, well, you should have known. And that was one of the key things that I took into my adult life of like, I should have known everything. I should know
Mm,
everything. If I'm having a conversation with you and you're saying something to me that I don't understand, then there's something wrong with me. Instead of me being curious and saying, "Oh, wait, I don't understand what you're saying," it's I should have known, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So there was
Yeah.
there was a lot of that, and I lost her when I was 16. So I, it's terrible because when I think back on that, I loved her, but I didn't like her.
Break that down for me.
So I loved my mom, but I didn't like her because she was mean. She was always mean to me. And of the three of them, I liked hanging out with my dad the best because even though, we had the situation of he didn't protect me, he wasn't mean to me.
Hmm.
He wasn't always mean to me. He wasn't mean to
Hmm.
me like she was. I always felt like she was mad at me. And so I didn't like her.
Mm. And like you said, maybe she was just taking her frustrations from her past out on you,
Oh, yeah.
which would lead me to ask you this question. Speaking about generational trauma,
Hmm.
did you find yourself doing that with your kids?
It's a great question. And, it's interesting because I ended up only having one son. God only blessed me with one son. He said, that's enough and probably good, and he's a wonderful man. He's a wonderful man. I was so committed to not ever abusing him. And I did not directly. What I did do, and I realized this over the last couple of years, is because I was in survival mode my adult life, and
Mm.
his father and I did not have a good, healthy relationship at all, that my son was raised in a home of strife. And that is not a healthy way to raise someone. And you have a mom who, I was working. My husband at the time wasn't. He wasn't a hard worker at all. And so I had all this pressure on me. And so it didn't take much that if I did get upset, if something did happen, or God forbid I get triggered, I'm over the top upset. So, but I never directed that towards my son ever. I was really careful about that. Um, but again, I apologized to him because he was raised in a home of strife. He had parents that were yelling at each other, a
Mm.
mom who is always tense. Although I did make a lot of effort to spend time with him, quality one-on-one time. So there was a lot of, he says, Mom, you did so many things right. Because I apologized to him for it. When I
Okay.
realized that was what was going on, this is
Okay.
a few years ago, I apologized to him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
this is how sweet he is. He wanted to comfort me because I'm crying as I'm talking to him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, honey, this is for you. And and he says, but Mom, you did a lot of things right. So I know I did, but yeah, I was really careful about that one.
Yeah.
I've used myself instead.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, it's a good thing for us to do a gut check every now and again to
Oh
see
yeah.
where we're at,
Yeah.
because we might, we may think that we're doing a good job or everything is cool because we're living in our normal.
Right.
We don't know that our situation is 10, 12, 20 when the normal is like 4 or 5.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
when somebody says, hey Lisa, can we have a talk, because I see the way that you're dealing with your son and that's not normal. A lot of people can't handle that gut check.
No, no.
A
And
lot of us are still in survival mode
yes.
and we are in denial.
The thing is, I mean, let's describe survival mode. So what survival mode is you are completely overwhelmed. And it's like, your brain is this big, but you are so overwhelmed that you only have this much space to work in, and so I often say, and I know this is true in my life, that you're just trying to put out the fires and everything, and you
Mm-hmm.
will do things in survival mode that you wouldn't normally do outside of survival mode. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of blinders that we have on when we're in survival mode, because again, we're limited. Our brain capacity is, the adrenal glands are going, the brain is going, it's hyper vigilant. So it's only got so much space that, you can respond, you can
Sure,
manage stuff.
sure. And I say that because after my tour of duty in the Marine Corps, I came back here to Milwaukee and I didn't know that I was in survival mode.
Hmm.
It didn't start to click for me until years later,
Yeah.
after slightly before, after college. Excuse me. I was going through a lot of mental anguish, I guess.
Yeah.
I oftentimes thought of myself as being physically here, but mentally back in North Carolina where I was stationed. My mind was still there.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
physically here.
Yep.
So I was kind of detached from everybody and everything
Yep.
here. So I had to readapt, and that was difficult. That
Yeah.
that was difficult. And it I think that for me was the start of my downward spiral to PTSD and depression, and all the bells and whistles that come along with it,
Yep.
right? So I was in survival mode for a while and I was in denial. I Deep down I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't
Oh,
I couldn't speak it
yep.
out.
Yep.
I couldn't
Yep.
say something's wrong with you, Mark. Go get help. I I couldn't do it until years later, years after that, but I just dealt with it because
Did you
that's how it
just
was.
you physically couldn't say it, or you just did, was there like shame that kept you from, yeah.
Plenty, 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 plenty shame. Yes.
Just,
So
oh, well,
yeah.
and let me say this, thank you for your service and thank you for what you did for our country, because I really appreciate it. And my heart goes out to you guys, because you guys see things and experience things that I'm not supposed to.
No. Well, and here's the kicker, Lisa, and I'll continue with the questions. But a lot of us, we experience stuff here in the States.
Yes.
We didn't
Yes.
go overseas to experience trauma.
That is so true. That's true. Absolutely.
We saw it right
Absolutely.
here in our own backyard,
Yep.
and we couldn't do nothing
Unfortunately.
about it. But that's another story.
Yeah, I know. That's a whole nother podcast. Seriously, we can go down that one. Woo,
Yeah,
you
maybe
are
I'll be on
so
your
right
podcast. I can be on your
there.
podcast, and I'll spill my guts there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yes. So speaking of trauma and triggers, what are yours? Your triggers?
So I know that if triggers usually they always go back to a root reason, right? And a lot of mine, like I have abandonment issues, absolutely. if I feel like I'm not being heard, if I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I'm being disrespected,
Mm-hmm.
those are definitely triggers. And
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting one, and I've shared this on my podcast. I had one about a couple of years ago when I went and visited my son and daughter-in-law. And it was interesting because it was the first time in my life where I walked through the entire trigger almost out of a body experience, almost where
Mm-hmm.
I slowed down and I walked through the entire trigger and from beginning to end. And it was really empowering because it showed me, um, it made me aware of, okay, I'm triggered. Okay, crazy thoughts are going on. I want to
Yeah. Yeah.
self-sabotage. Okay. And okay, wait, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a minute, and I immediately knew what, as soon as I was triggered, and I wasn't in a safe space when I was first triggered. So I had to keep my mouth shut right there. But I was becoming aware of what the root was. When I got into a safe space, which was with my husband, um, that's when I started kind of spewing and just like the stuff in my head. And I'm like, I finally looked at myself, well, clearly I am being triggered. This is
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Like
Mm-hmm.
like, da da.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, so we're not going to do that self-sabotaging thing that I just talked about. We're going to go do the right thing. And it was so empowering because, and that's what I mean about the self-awareness. I couldn't have done that without self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And the root of that is the trigger that hit me was I didn't consciously think this, again, I'm reliving it, but I wasn't being believed that I was hurt. And that goes right back to my mom, where she wouldn't believe me when I would be sick or if I got hurt. She wouldn't believe me. She wouldn't take me to the doctor. My dad would take me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had gotten hurt. And so it was a trigger and it was really interesting. And so now I know that trigger is there. But now that it's been exposed, it doesn't have an effect on me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it. So that's how you manage it,
Right.
is acknowledge that you're going through it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And when you recognize you're going through it, it gives you that you can take that pause and go, okay, wait, give me a second, and don't react, because the problem with triggers, and I know because I did it for so many years, you get triggered and you just react and it's over the top. Usually your reaction doesn't line up with what the situation is. It's usually way over the top. And I would get triggered and I would react over the top. And I would watch people like back up and just kind of like, what's going on? And I'm thinking I'm crazy. I'm, and I know this is over the top, but I didn't have any control. Once I was aware of my triggers, none of that happened. I didn't have to go and clean up a bunch of messes that I made when I was triggered.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Did you ever take a chance to talk to your brother about what he did with you?
No, no, and he never acknowledged it. My dad wouldn't even acknowledge it. Um, I tried talking to my father when we were adults, when I was grown up,
Mm-hmm.
and he wouldn't even look at me. He sat on the couch and his chin started quivering, but he wouldn't even acknowledge that I was talking to him. So, and my brother, no, I never had that conversation with him. Mm-mm.
Mm. Does that does that make you feel a certain type of way, knowing that you didn't come to terms with your brother from that perspective? Or
Not
you just
any,
let it
no,
go?
no,
Just let it
I
go.
let that go a long time ago, and
Yeah,
he's not in my life. And the reason why he's not in my life is because he's still abusive, and you're not welcome to come into my life and do that
indeed,
anymore.
indeed. And that's one thing that people have to learn, is that when you're in a position of healing and growing yourself, you have to get into the habit of not dealing with people who can't give you that peace.
Yeah.
You have got to understand that if
Yes.
people can't give you that peace of mind that you are seeking, you got to cut them short.
Yeah. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. And I felt guilty for a long time and the reason why I cut him off is he went after my son one time and that was it. That was it. I
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
and for a long time I felt really guilty about that. What kind of a person am I that, and when I was taking this one healing workshop, the leader said, you know what? If the person is still abusing you, you don't have to, they don't have to be in your life. You know,
Period.
and they were talking about forgiveness, and I was like, they were talking about forgiveness for us, and I was in agreement with that.
Yeah.
And that was so freeing to me, like, okay, I don't have to be in a relationship with him. Good. Okay. And it was so relieving because I don't have to deal with all that stuff in his,
No,
you know,
you don't.
bringing that into my family's life.
Yeah. Uh-uh. So for those that are watching and paying attention to our interview, if you guys have any questions for Miss Lisa, please do so. We're talking about childhood trauma. We're talking about healing and growing,
Mm-hmm.
which is the title of her podcast. So,
Yes.
speaking of which, when did you start your podcast?
I started August of 2023. So it's been out just over a year, and I think I'm on my 104th episode.
Okay. All right. So, who do you talk with?
I've got some really amazing. I mean, really, honestly, a lot of amazing people.
Yeah.
I've had such a diverse of people. Men, women, people all over the world, young,
Yeah.
old, you know.
Yeah.
And so I love that, and people telling their stories. I've had wonderful experts. There's a few of them, but one of them that was my favorite was Tim Fletcher, and he is in Canada. He's a complex trauma expert. He's amazing, just amazing. But the thing that I love about him is he's got the scientific background, but he explains things so that we understand, in layman's terms. And sometimes I'm like, guys, is he in my head? Because he can explain, the thoughts and the things that go on inside my head. And I'm like, okay, you're really good. You're really good.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Uh, I'm going to read something to you, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
Survivors of childhood trauma can struggle with processing what they survived, which can lead them to having emotional and physical symptoms.
Yeah.
Can you identify with that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, it's I don't say his name right, but Mate Gabor, he's an expert as well, and he talks about how trauma physically affects us, and that they're finding that even autoimmune diseases, people with trauma are having autoimmune diseases, and when they're
Fibromyalgia.
yes, and
Fibromyalgia. People who have
fibromyalgia,
fibromyalgia.
MS is a
Yes,
big one, and rheumatoid
yes.
arthritis.
Ain't that crazy?
And they're finding that when they heal the trauma in you, that the diseases are going away. They're actually going away. It is crazy.
What? Yeah,
Yeah.
I just discovered this before our interview that people that were dealing with childhood trauma, they can develop MS, fibromyalgia, and other chronic illnesses.
Yes. Yes. Cancer. It's very common for
That's
survivors to
crazy.
get cancer. And it's interesting. In my case, mine's different because I was always physically active, and so maybe that's what helped get the trauma out of my body. Because one of the
Mm,
ways to get trauma out of your body is you have to be physically active. You have to move, get the
hmm.
movement going.
Yeah.
But I spent a lifetime living like I was all balled up and tight. I was always tense. And how I know that is my ex-husband, he would call me on my cell phone, and I'm literally sitting like we're sitting right now, and I pick up the phone and he's like, "Did you just run to the phone?" And he said that a few times, and then I thought, well, yeah, I am kind of breathing hard, but it wasn't because I was running around. It's because I was so tense all the time and I was
Oh.
not breathing deep. It was very shallow. And so because I was active and because I was all tensed up, I've had so many surgeries, I can't even tell you because I've
Mm,
torn things up.
mm,
And all of it is like either the neck, the shoulders, or the back. So I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. And so
mm.
the thing that's another reason why I do the podcast, because if we can get to young people and they can get their trauma taken care of, they're not going to have to deal with all this stuff that,
Yeah.
maybe they won't get any autoimmune disease. Maybe they won't tear up their back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking to people, have you, well, let me just be blunt. How do you help others heal and grow?
So I for one thing, I share my own stories. So I nothing's off the table, which is
Okay.
interesting. And so people can connect with that. And then bringing experts on that give actual resources, tools. A lot of the people that I have on, they have something that they can offer the audience. It could be maybe a breathing technique or, something along those lines, or maybe they're offering their book for free, So I bring on resources of things that people don't have to spend money. Like my podcast will always be free and the guests will never have to pay to be on there. This is a
Correct.
service
Same
that
here.
I'm doing because whatever I can do to help someone. I
Yes.
mean, I know I've already had family members listen. It's a blessing listening to my podcast and saying, one of them said, you know what? I now understand triggers. I didn't realize I was being triggered.
Mm.
Okay, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
There
Mm-hmm.
you go.
Yeah.
So knowledge is also, this is one of the things when in doing so much of my trauma research. Understanding your trauma is powerful for your healing journey and critical
Ooh. Mm.
because it does that
Mm.
thing where it goes, oh, the behaviors. And you recognize that, oh, those behaviors are because I was traumatized, not because I'm crazy or not because I'm a bad person, because that shame shuts us down and makes us stay in our head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how can a person that has permanent changes to the brain, so to speak, or basically, for lack of a better term, they adapted to their behavior, how can they change?
So again, some of the modalities, I know one of the best ones, and it was for me, is EMDR, and it's eye movement, and I don't remember the whole name. It's a medical term, but if you just even look up EMDR, and it's really powerful, and it's extremely powerful for PTSD.
Mm.
And it's interesting because I know my experience with it, and it felt like it was different. But when I was just listening to the book I was sharing with you about, he did a whole chapter on EMDR and understanding it, and what it does is it's part of you going back and remembering the event, but also bringing in your own, opening it up to where you can bring in your own imagination and resolve that trauma situation for the child and for the adult. I
Okay.
hope that makes sense. And I can
Yeah.
give you an
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So for me, and I didn't realize that this was so powerful or common apparently until recently, but when I was doing my EMDR, at one point, my therapist was saying, okay, I was standing in front of my mom as a little girl, and she was saying, tell your mom. And I immediately went, oh, no, 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 because I'll get hurt. And so she said, okay, why don't you bring Big Lisa alongside? And that was so profound because nobody had ever come alongside little Lisa and protected her and gave her an opportunity for a voice. But I'm doing this while I'm doing the EMDR. And that little Lisa respectfully told my mom exactly how she felt. And that opened up the whole opportunity for me to work through several of my situations like that. And I thought I was the only one that experienced that. Well, in my research, that's very common. And so when I was able to finally have that voice with my mom, it was amazing.
Mm. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. Uh, I don't know if you ever heard of this phrase, daddy issues,
Yes.
but I have.
Yes.
I've heard,
I have.
in my time, women say, yeah, yeah, I got daddy issues because of abandonment or what have you.
Mhm.
Uh, what's your take on people with daddy issues,
Well, what do
particularly
you
women with daddy issues, and how they what's their what is their view like about relationships as it relates to in your experience with talking with them about daddy issues?
I think and I know this is my experience too, and in working with some women, this is their experience too. When we're little girls, we have this fantasy of who our dad is.
Mm,
Kids are
mm,
just, that's the way they are.
mm,
And the hardest part is when you realize your dad isn't what he's not your Prince Charming, he's a human being.
mm,
Um, so there's that happens. But then when your dad is dark, like he does the dark stuff. If he abuses you, us as adults can't even wrap our head around that. Like I don't understand that at all. You don't understand that. So
Mm,
how can a child understand that?
mm,
It's really, really, really confusing. And I can remember as a child thinking, wait, you're not supposed to do that. You're an adult, you know? And I
mm,
was really confused by a lot of things that were going on because in my understanding, you're an adult. And I also had the belief too, and I find a lot of children have this, that, oh, well, you're an adult, so you're perfect. You've arrived.
mm, mm. Okay. Okay.
So with daddy, I think that's a lot of it. I think for people, I know that's my experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. And I I often say in conversations when it comes to fatherhood that a father is a daughter's example. It's their first love.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And
So,
I ended up marrying my dad, you know,
mm.
twice before I got it right.
Yeah. So, and maybe this is a message to the guys who have daughters is we
Yeah.
need to be the example
Yeah.
of what love is from a man's perspective because I I do a fatherhood group on Fridays and I said this to the guys this past Friday. I said to them, you need to be careful how you conduct yourself around your kids because believe it or not, they're always watching you.
I was just going to say they're always watching and listening.
You are
Oh,
the
yeah.
because you are the example.
Yeah.
Brothers, you are the example. Whether you want to accept it or not,
Fact.
you are the example of what a man is to your sons. You are the example of what a man is to your daughter. And this is what your daughter is going to gravitate to because this
Yeah.
is what she knows. So
Exactly.
be a proper example for both of them.
Exactly. That's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I did,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and yeah. And I also had a belief because at around 11 years old, my brother also shared with me that it was really interesting. We were having just a normal conversation, which was rare. And he said to me, nobody likes you. Mom and dad's friends, like none of them like you. You know that, right?
Mm,
And I just remember feeling crushed.
mm,
I just instantly believed him. I didn't question him at all. Like he said it so convincingly. And it literally felt like someone punched me in the chest. I was so devastated. And so imagine taking that belief throughout your adult life. And I made a lot of poor choices. So
mm,
I spent many years looking for love,
mm,
looking
mm,
for love.
mm. Yeah, because if you don't get it as a kid, you are going to make some hell of five mistakes as an
Yeah, because
adult.
what does it look like? What does it even
Right,
look like? What does it feel like? I don't know. I'm just gonna go try this out. Okay, that didn't work out. I try that.
right,
Yeah.
right. Your
Hmm.
trauma, that trauma is going to carry over, boil over, rub over. I mean, it's going to consume your adult life because you're looking for something that isn't there and you're trying to create something that, well, you're trying to create something from people that can't give it to you.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like you say, we're a product of our environment. It's what our normal is.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is, this there's so much going on with, like Hollywood and with the kids that have been going through stuff like Justin Bieber, and I've been watching this stuff.
Mhm.
There's a reason why, and I'm saying this to the audience and keep this in mind. There's a reason why people act out, whether it's a child or an adult. We don't just wake up one morning and just act out because we feel like just being a jerk. There's a reason why people act out. And so remember that too, and so it should, because as parents, it's especially when we're busy and we're working, it's real easy to just try to shut it down. But give yourself some time with your child and talk to them and there's something going on. Give them a safe space
Mm.
to share. It's one thing I will say about one of my daughter-in-laws. She's really good with the kids, with her children that way. And when they act out, it's not, oh, just automatic punishment. She understands, okay, there's something going on. We need to talk. And she always creates this safe space for the kids. And it works. And she's teaching them how to self-regulate, how to manage these emotions that they don't understand yet. That's what we have to do. And I didn't get that. And so I went into my adult life a little bit of
A rebel.
a rebel, a firecracker. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Lisa was doing Lisa.
Exactly. So true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's next for you, Lisa, in your journey?
Oh, what's next? So, yeah, I'm going to continue on with the podcast. I really enjoy that. I'm meeting the most amazing people. I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah.
I also I rewrote it's a women's childhood abuse healing workshop. I mentioned that earlier. And it's an 8-week course. And I'm going to start it in February. And I went through one similar, and I know this one is a lot more powerful, but it's not just you go through an 8-week workshop and then, okay, that's good. There's going to be a whole community afterwards. So you're going to have support forever, and these women are not going to be on their own. And I know when I did a similar workshop before, it was incredibly powerful for women, and really created a safe space for them to begin their healing journey or to go deeper into their healing journey.
Mm.
And it's been really profound. So that's what I've got coming up next year, and I am beyond excited about it.
Nice. Nice. How can people contact you?
So you can, I'm on YouTube, so my channel's there. I'm on Spotify. I'm on also Apple. I'm on Instagram, Lisa M. Tickle. I'm on TikTok, which is Lisa Tickle. LinkedIn, it's
Mm.
Lisa Tickle, and it's Tickel.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that's how you can reach me, or you can email me, which is my website too is healing and growing hand in hand podcast.com. So you can go there. And the other website I have for my workshop is women's childhood abuse healing workshop.com. And you can reach me through either one of those websites.
Nice. Well, Lisa Tickle, it, it has
Makes you
been
smile, doesn't it?
it has been quite a pleasure to have this conversation with you and really get to dig a little deep about trauma and how we can overcome it.
Yes, yes. Most importantly,
Yeah,
yes.
because I think a lot of us that are suffering in silence,
Yeah,
we need to hear this type of conversation to let them know that number one, it's okay to not be okay. Number two, do something about it. Don't
you
sit
know,
there and accept what you're going through as the norm anymore. We have to get out of those stigmas and those stuck patterns.
exactly. There's one statistic I want to share with the audience that Bobby Click shared, and that is on average, women who are sexually abused is between the ages of 13 and 17,
Mm,
and they will not share that experience for 4 decades. So these
mm,
women are suffering for 40 years. Now,
mm,
I know that to be true about almost all abuse,
mm, mm,
that people suffer in silence, which is exactly what you're saying. And we don't
mm,
need to suffer in silence at
mm,
all.
mm,
And I'm telling you, you don't
mm.
need to suffer in silence.
Yeah. I mean, and I personally suffered in silence, which is why
Yeah.
I'm doing this. I'm doing my podcast to
Yes.
break. We need to break that barrier of
Hmm.
keeping our trauma trapped
Exactly.
because it's not doing us any good. Because as we both said, bottling up this trauma can lead to physical,
It will.
long-term physical problems,
Yep.
right?
Yep. And mental as
And
well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like when this stuff comes out in the light, when you say it or you write it out, it loses its power.
Hey, listen, I'm through holding this stuff in. I'm not
Yeah.
going to do it. I'm not
Good.
going to do it. So this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm speaking out on it, and I'm going to continue to do it. I'm going to continue to bring good people like yourself on here, and hopefully I can get to that point where, you know, the good Lord can say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant."
Yeah. One of my favorite scriptures, I know. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Mhm. So
Yes. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you.
yes, and thank you for doing what you're doing, and thank you for taking the time to come on my show and share this good word and share that good knowledge. So
Yes.
yeah. So with that being said, Lisa, and everybody that's paying attention, my name is Mark Ross, and this has been another episode of the Speak Your Truth with Mark Ross podcast. Always remember, guys, self care is important. So please make your mental and physical health a priority every day first. Have a good
That's
night,
right.
everybody, and have a good night, Lisa.